Sichuan, it looks like civil war, and this is going on. And in the middle of all this, Chairman Mao takes a tour through
6 provinces through south central China.
and his conclusion is that things could never be better. Well, when he said things could never be better, we began to think, what is he talking about? You know, and then finally we got the idea. He said things couldn't be better because people all over China were discussing Cultural Revolution. What does it mean? What does it mean as far as I'm concerned? What does it mean as far as my unit is concerned? What does it mean as far as my country is concerned? Everybody was discussing it. You sit down at the dinner table and the grandparents and the children and the grandchildren are all sitting there. Everybody's discussing the Cultural Revolution. What happened in my unit today? What happened in your unit today? What does it mean? Had everybody involved. That's what he meant. Things couldn't be better. In other words, politicizing a whole generation of Chinese people. Very high political, putting them on a very high political level. This is the experience that Chinese people have had. Now, for example, in the Cultural Revolution, there was some disruption. I know one factory that was making this corduroy right not far from Shanghai. They practically reduced the factory to shambles. Broke machinery. Of course, they later found out there were some bad people involved there. Of course, you lost some machinery, but you found out you had some enemy in your midst. What's wrong with that? Meantime, you put the factory back to work, and in a few months, they make up all the lost production because everybody's full of spirit and they know what they're working for. What's wrong with that? That's very good. This is the experience of the Chinese people. Little disruption, as long as it has some political purpose in mind to move, to consolidate socialism, the socialist system in China. What's wrong with that? It's a very good thing. This is the way they look at it. Another thing the Chinese people have experienced. Going all the way back, you can say, to 1935, when Mao first became the chairman of the Communist Party, that every time that his line was followed, his analysis was followed, the Chinese people would achieve a victory, no matter whether it was during the anti-Japanese aggression war, the war for the liberation of China, or after that, the construction of socialism and so forth. Every time there was a crucial period, a crucial point, a turning point, and there was a big debate, and there were these debates in China again and again and again. Every time his line was followed, there was a logic there, and also, if they followed that line, then they achieved another victory. Guarantee you. And that doesn't mean there aren't conflicts on the highest level as well as the lowest level of China. There are conflicts. There will be conflicts in the future. There's no question about it. But at this particular time, it's a time of great unity rather than conflict around Mao's particular political line. And I think you can see this. If you read the documents of that National People's Congress, you'll see Zhou Enlai's report, which reflects in great detail the report that was given, that he gave at the 10th Congress of the Communist Party, which was held about a year and a half ago. It reflects that line. Of course, Mao had a great deal to do with that report, and it reflects exactly what he wants to be done. Now, if there's unity, it's unity around that. It's unity around that. The same thing with the new Constitution that they've just enacted in the People's Congress. Actually, this Constitution, they were discussing it for about 5 years. They meant to put it into effect long ago, but then the Lin Biao thing started. Well, they had to get that cleared up first, because then if you didn't clear this up first, how do you know who you're electing as the delegates to the parliament, to the National People's Congress? So obviously you had to clear up Lin Biao business first, then you go on to the business of state, and then everything is clear. The Constitution is, once again, reflects very precisely Mao's line, and this is the thing that they have unity around. This is my interpretation anyway. And I think some people are a little puzzled about the emergence of Deng Xiaoping in such a position of importance, because in 1966, 1967, he was being, called the worst names, and Liu Shaoqi, they said, was a capitalist roader, and of course there were two capitalist roaders, and Deng Xiaoping was one of them. So how do you account for the fact that now he's in such a very, very prominent position? Well, I think we'll be talking about this for a long time, and anyway, here is my preliminary, mind you, my preliminary ideas on this. How could he make such a remarkable political comeback? I think you have to understand Mao's policy as far as people who have made errors is concerned. This is very important because it's the policy he's been following for a great number of years. Just as I mentioned before in the question of the old cadres, and Deng Xiaoping is definitely an old cadre, that if they make a mistake, and Deng Xiaoping made very serious mistakes, no question about that, but if they recognize those mistakes, if they're sincere and change their opinions, all right, then there's no reason why you shouldn't put them back in positions of power. And I think Deng Xiaoping did go through this process. I remember at the time of the Ninth Party Congress, which was in April 1969, the question of Deng Xiaoping came up then. And it was Chairman Mao himself who revealed that Deng had written a letter to the Central Committee saying that he realized the errors he made, he analyzed what the roots of those errors were, and that he said he asked to be put back to work again. This was his demand, his request. And Mao's decision on this was, why not? Why not put him back to work? So this is the policy that Mao's carried out, not just in relation to Deng Xiaoping. There were a whole lot of examples. For example, Wang Ming. The question of Wang Ming was maybe a name you're not very familiar with. Some of you who know Chinese history know about him, especially modern Chinese history. He caused terrible losses to the Communist Party and to the Workers' and Peasants' Army in China in the 1930s, at a time when they couldn't afford to lose anything. I mean, just terrible losses. 80% of the party network and all this kind of thing, and most of the divisions of the army and so forth. Why? Because he was carrying out an incorrect political line. It was only in January 1935, when I mentioned Mao became the chairman of the party, that this line was corrected. But they didn't just dump Wang Ming by the wayside. He went to Yan'an with everybody else, which became the Revolutionary Citadel at that time. And on Mao's insistence, although Wang Ming, contrary to Deng Xiaoping's example, never would recognize really his errors. And although they tried to work with him again and again, he still would never recognize he had made errors. And they faced him with the facts, but that was his stubbornness. Despite that, it was on Mao's insistence that he be elected to the 7th Central Committee, which was elected in 1945. This is after the rectification movement and so forth, in which they criticized Wang Ming and his line and so forth. Incidentally, they invited him to the 7th Party Congress, but he never showed up because he said he was sick. But they criticized him anyway. And put him on the Central Committee. He was on the Central Committee until 1962, when on the excuse of having some illness, he wanted to go to the Soviet Union. He went and never came back. And that was the end of Wang Ming. But the point I'm trying to make is that the policy is you treat the illness to cure the patient. If somebody makes a mistake, after all, none of us are infallible. If you do something, you're bound to create a bigger mistake or a smaller mistake. Of course, it's ideal if you make the mistake smaller. It's also ideal if you catch the mistake in a timely way rather than let it go on and get bigger and get more important. This is the policy, to try to save people, to try to correct whatever errors they have and put them back to work again. Because after all, they have a certain experience, a certain expertise, should utilize them. So this is one aspect of this. They should be put back into positions of authority. This is the same thing again, and as I mentioned before, this was the very thing that Lin Biao was violating. Now, in the violation of this thing, I think he was especially fearful of Deng Xiaoping. I'm talking about Lin Biao now. He wanted to make sure that he didn't get back in. So for a long while, even after Deng Xiaoping was rehabilitated, he was not put back on the political bureau, and he was, of course, not nearly in the important position that he is now. He was deputy premier, but inside the party, he had no position of authority. This was for this period until they cleared up this whole Lin Biao business, and they found that he was not only obstructing the way to clear Deng Xiaoping, but he was also trying to undercut a lot of other people. I remember in 1971, even as late as 1970, in Shanghai, there was a terrible vilification campaign against Marshal Chen Yi. Now, Marshal Chen Yi was a great old guy. He was rather blustery and bombastic, but really a very good military man and an excellent administrator. Shanghai really boomed under him. There's no question about it. And there came this terrible campaign against him, calling him every kind of name, saying he was incompetent and he had done this wrong, done that wrong. And I must tell you that most of the people in Shanghai didn't buy it. They just didn't buy it. And we couldn't figure out where it was coming from. Well, it seems that part of Lin Biao's whole plan was, one by one, to get rid of all the marshals, the former marshals who were still alive, and also anybody of importance that he felt was going to stand in his way. Now, my interpretation of this present situation is that in the uncovering of all this Lin Biao business, they discovered that he was also doing this to Deng Xiaoping. And once this was cleared up, then there was no reason why he shouldn't be put back in these positions of authority. For example, a few months ago, or after the 10th Party Congress, he was made a member of the Political Bureau. And then he was made a member of the Standing Committee of the Political Bureau. Now, of course, he's not only that, but he's also one of the vice chairmen of the Communist Party. So he's completely rehabilitated. This, I think, is the process that his case went through. And I think it shows you that Mao's idea of trying to unite everybody who can possibly be united to narrow the target of who you're opposing so as to get everybody with you, get the majority with you. This is one of his techniques, the way he does it. Also, it must be pointed out that Deng Xiaoping's case is quite different from Liu Shaoqi. According to the information that we read in China, and I think this information is already here, it's been translated, I've seen it here. And, he, of course, Liu Shaoqi, not once, but apparently 5 times, betrayed the party. That is, he was arrested, he gave names, he exposed the party network, people lost their lives, organizations were destroyed, not once, but 5 times. And not only that, apparently now they call him an enemy agent and all this kind of thing. They got a whole long list of names, traitor, scab, this, that, and the other thing. It's a long, long list. Now, Deng Xiaoping has none of this kind of history. His history is clean as far as this kind of thing is concerned. And in addition to that, he has many achievements. He was a very important and a very effective administrator, a very effective military man, and therefore his history is quite different from Liu Shaoqi. So there's no reason why, once he recognized his errors, once he corrected himself, that he should be put back in the position of power. And that's my explanation at this point of why he's where he is today. So this is as far as Deng Xiaoping is concerned. I think it's true that Premier Zhou Enlai is quite ill. And when I was in China, we knew that at that time he had high blood pressure. We knew that, everybody knew that. He worked at a terrific pace. He got 3 or 4 hours sleep every night, that was all. This also, people in China, everybody, and every man and woman on the street knows that in China. So it wasn't unusual that, sooner or later, the flesh just had to give. And so it didn't surprise anybody when he was declared he was ill, even at that age. So I don't think there's any competition between Deng Xiaoping and Zhou Enlai. I think they're on the same political line. I think the same thing holds true for example, for Jiang Qing, Mao's wife, and Wang Huwen, the young man who's the vice chairman, and Yao Wenyuan, because people are saying, well, why didn't they get positions in the government? And well, I can't tell, I wasn't at the political bureau meeting which decided this, but it seems to me that although they may not have positions in the government, they have very important positions as far as the party is concerned. Wang Huwen is still one of the vice chairmen of the party. He may be acting like a secretary general of the party. They haven't made this public yet. Also, Jiang Qing is responsible for ideological and cultural work throughout China. As a matter of fact, the whole anti-Lin Biao, anti-Confucius movement we're talking about tonight is under her direction. She's the one responsible for carrying out this movement. And it's not ended now. It's going to go on because they're asking people not, just don't think it's over. It's a long process. So Jiang Qing's got extremely important work. Yao Wenyuan is also doing important work. He's in charge of publications. In the Communist Party, they have various departments. And one department is what they call propaganda. Now, here I know propaganda has a bad connotation. There, they look at it like publicity. And this is Yao Wenyuan's field. Newspapers, magazines, radio stations, TV, so forth. This is his field. And then, of course, there's a new man that very few people know about. His name is Zhang Chunqiao. Zhang Chunqiao is the head of the Revolutionary Committee, or he was the head of the Revolutionary Committee in Shanghai. He's an old Shanghai person. I met him in 1957. So my impression of him is a very sharp man, very knowledgeable person. He knows not only China very thoroughly, he knows the world quite thoroughly, and very articulate man. I've heard him give speeches, 3, 4, 5-hour speeches without notes. But he's got the policy down, just 100%, and he can express it in terms that everybody can understand it, very convincing, and moves people very, very deeply. He's this kind of person, a very competent, very capable person. Well, now this person who's in tandem with Deng Xiaoping in leading positions. So it means to me that it's not just one person that they're preparing to take over the position that Mao and Zhou one day will eventually have to relinquish. After all, they're human beings, the way of all flesh, we will all wind up in the same place. They'll wind up there too. But actually what they're doing is they've created a collective out of this political bureau that they have there. And they put people like Deng Xiaoping and Zhang Chunqiao in tandem to lead this collective. There's not one person that's obvious at this point, but several people. This is the way I see it. It seems to me that the Chinese people now have emerged as a result of this National People's Congress on an entirely new plane. And I think what we're going to see from now on is China really racing ahead in all fields, economically, politically, culturally, and so forth. And, well, we'll have to wait and see what the results are, but these are my views on this situation right now. Thank you. Would you like to ask some questions? As long as my voice holds out. Must be some questions. Yes?
You alluded to this yourself. The American press recently has suggested that Mao is being phased out and he may no longer be in control. And you apparently don't feel that this is true at this point.
The gentleman asked, do I believe whether Mao's being phased out or is no longer in control? I don't believe it. I don't believe it. Even if he physically is not able to assume many of the duties that he did in the past, as I mentioned before, the program that they've established, the constitution that they've enacted, are all according to his line. And so I feel that what he's asking the Chinese people to do is still continuing along that road.
You feel he's still being consulted?
Oh, definitely. I definitely feel that. I definitely feel that. Yes, yes. The only instance I know of there, I understand recently he's supposed to have made a self-criticism. I'm not sure about that. It may be phony. But I remember during the Great Leap, the years of the Great Leap Forward, when you know, so many people were making steel in the backyards and all this kind of thing. You know, many people here misinterpret the Great Leap Forward. They say it was the Great Leap Backward and all that kind of stuff. I think they misinterpreted it. There were many mistakes made, and among those mistakes was that Mao claims that he forgot the idea that if you're going to make steel, you have to have the coal. And in a lot of places in China, there's not enough coal, so they had to tie up all the transportation in order to ship the coal and iron ore all over the country in order to make steel. It didn't make much sense. And he has apparently said he criticized, apparently we were told he criticized himself for making this kind of thing. But I want to point out, making this kind of decision, but I want to point out that the making of steel in backyard furnaces at that time was not a bad idea. It didn't make much sense in the cities where you had steel mills, except that it motivated people politically. That was all right, but for example, the steel we made in our backyard, nobody could use. It was lousy steel, so it didn't help very much. But what it did, as far as the countryside is concerned, is that it brought tens of millions of peasants right into the 20th century, where they had to make steel. They could make iron before, but now they had to make steel. And what it did was almost overnight rationalize the whole distribution of the iron and steel industry in China, not just along the coastal areas and maybe a few important cities, but all over the country, where now you have small or medium or even large steel mills, whereas before you had nothing. And of course, once that you have that, then you also have machinery, you have automotive industry, and so forth. So this was one of the results of the Great Leap Forward, which many people didn't see. But as I say, at that particular period, Mao apparently made the mistake of saying do this, and then it resulted in the transportation being tied up. That's the only instance I can think of. Yes?
His quotation from Chairman Mao,
Yeah.
population China, I get that that is the creation of Lin Biao.
It was. Yeah, the Little Red Book was the creation of Lin Biao. He did it first in the Army in 1960-61, right after he took over from Peng Dehuai as Minister of Defense. Of course, now they don't read the little book. Mao, the people who are running the thing there say, just don't look at quotations, look at the whole work. Look at the whole works. You got to look there to see the whole thing, not just take you know, a paragraph or a sentence out of it. It may be misleading. And so you got to look at the whole thing. And not only study just what Mao says, but you got to look at the classic writings of Marx and Engels, Lenin, Stalin, and so forth. This is what they're asking them to do now. For example, now as part of the study for this Lin Biao, anti-Lin Biao, anti-Confucius thing, they're studying Lenin's State and the Revolution, Marx's Gotha program, the words of the International, and so forth. This is some of the study material that they're using for this particular campaign. Yes?
You mentioned a dichotomy between politics and technique. What's the status of that, those two forces now, and who are the big promoters of technique now?
What's the relationship between politics and technique and what?
And what's the relationship of what are the relationship of those two forces now? What's the status?
Well, like I mentioned, as a result of this campaign to criticize Lin Biao and Confucius, they put it back on course again. That is where you put politics in command. If you put politics in command, they say the technique will also follow. That is, you stimulate people, you make them aware politically, you motivate them, and then they'll be able to solve the technical problems. Just don't rely on a few experts, but motivate everybody, technicians, workers, everybody. I remember I went to the big bridge that they built across the Yangtze River at Nanking. Of course, they had to have bridge builders there. But if you go there now and they'll show it to you, they'll show all kinds of innovations that the workers made, of course, often in conjunction with the technicians, to solve certain very difficult problems. And they'll make a very big point of showing you that it was not just a few technicians built it, but that tens of thousands of workers also made a massive contribution to this thing. So put politics in command. That's still the rule right now. Of course, you have to fight for it. You know, it's easy, as I mentioned, it's easy to slip away. So if you want to hold on to this, you have to fight for it. Yes, please.
What do you see as the reason for the cancellation of the meat deal between the United States and China last week?
There are two possibilities. One is they got slugged on the previous shipments because they got a lot of rotten wheat. The other is they just don't need it. They've had 13 successive bumper harvests in China. A great deal of it is a result of the Cultural Revolution. That is the political motivation of people putting a lot of good works into process. So I think that they just don't need it right now. That's the other possibility, yeah.
Is there any efforts to curb population growth?
Yeah, definitely. There is a family planning program, a massive family program. Contraception is free. Abortion is also free on demand of the woman only. She doesn't have to ask anybody's permission. She can do it herself. And also, however, I must point out, they look at this a little bit differently than we do, in that they still think that people of all things are the most precious. They say that it's true, you got a mouth, you got to feed it, but for every mouth there's also a pair of hands and a brain. And they say man has the capability of solving all the problems, technically, or whatever way you want to put it. And they look at history, give you the example of history. When Malthus made his theory, how much grain were the people growing on the face of this earth? Now, how much grain are we growing? In other words, they say it's not a problem of technical competence, of gaining yield, but it's what kind of social system you got. Does it stimulate the growth of things? Does it stimulate the development of things? They think this is more important. And you have development, you have to have people to make the development. So, but in the course of planning everything in China, they also plan their family, the growth of the family too. This is good for the family and also good for the country. So this is their way of looking at it. It's not just we don't want any more kids. It's something more than that. Wait, yeah, all right.
In the past 25 years, it seems only number two men in mainland China. Both of them is wrong. Do you think that's random? And when you mentioned about Zhou Enlai, you said he, since 1935,
1931.
31,
Yeah,
obeyed Mao's command very carefully.
followed Mao's command. Yeah.
Okay, second is, after Lin Biao was died, and Mao Zedong tell people he was a very extreme left people. But now he said Lin Biao is very extreme right people.
Yeah.
What is Mao's standpoint? What did he put on?
Well, he called him a fascist, so I guess that puts him on the right. That's what he called Lin Biao. And it's true, like I mentioned, that Lin Biao was using ultra-left slogans because he couldn't use right slogans anymore. They were too discredited. To accomplish what he set out to do, he used ultra-left slogans. But in essence, what he was advocating was no different than what Liu Shaoqi was advocating. That is a turn to the right, a very serious turn to the right. And as I mentioned, that people felt that this rash of commandism, this rather oppressive atmosphere, was emanating from somewhere. It had to emanate from somewhere on top, and it was emanating from him. And that's contrary to the atmosphere they're trying to create in China today. So that's their attitude toward Lin Biao. He was an aberration, yeah.
How does Madame Song Qingling fit into the suburban picture of political struggle?
She's been mainly on the sidelines for a number of years because of health reasons. She's been in very poor health. And although she's still, in China, you're always, they give you the position whether you can fulfill it physically or not, as long as you're alive. And this has been her position. That, of course, she supported Mao without any question. There's no question about that. But she just physically not been able to be as active as she would like to be. That's her position. Any other questions? Yes, okay.
How do you think the Sino-Soviet relations will proceed in the coming years after the 10th party?
I don't see them getting off a dead center right now. the conflict is so deep and so bitter. It's affected state relations, it's affected trade, it affected the border talks. You know, they've been sitting down there and talking since 1969. They haven't moved 1 inch. And well, the attitude of the Soviets, of course, when they first came there wasn't very good either. Kuznetsov, the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, led the delegation. And he came to the meeting from what we were told in China, and the first thing he uttered was, "Do you want Peking and Shanghai?" And Chao Guanhua, who's now the foreign minister, answered back, "Do you want Leningrad and Moscow?" And they haven't moved since then. Another point was, you see in the western part, in the Xinjiang area, because there are Kazakhs on both sides of the border, there are Uzbeks on both sides of the border, and Uyghurs, there are the same ethnic groups on both sides of the border. And in some areas, there up one valley, there'll be a Soviet army, and up the other valley be People's Liberation Army. They're just locked in like that. Well, it's a very dangerous situation. You frequently have the small skirmishes and things like that. It's a very dangerous situation. Well, when Ho Chi Minh died and Kosygin went to the funeral in Hanoi, on his way back, you remember there was a meeting between Zhou Enlai and him at the Peking airport. At that meeting, Zhou asked that both sides pull back 20 miles, on both sides, and Kosygin turned him down. So they're still locked like that on that border. And of course, the waterways, before both sides use the waterways, although it's very complicated, without delimiting the border. Now they want to delimit the border, and the Soviets just refuse. Of course, the issue there is that, you see, Lenin recognized that the treaties were forced on the Chinese people by the Tsarist regimes in Russia over a long, long period, in which they gobbled up hundreds of thousands of square miles of Chinese territory, including even Vladivostok. It was originally a Chinese city. And now China's saying, look, it's no use talking about that, that's history. It's no way we can adjust this thing, but on the border we got, that's the historical border. Let's adjust it there. Let's make clear there, which channel is yours, which channel is ours, under what rules you use it, and so on and so forth. Very detailed kind of thing. And these are the proposals they're making, but the Soviets say, well, we refuse to recognize that they're unequal treaties, and instead of making a delimitation, they want more territory. Well, of course, the Chinese say, you're crazy, and they'll never agree to that. So the thing's just stymied there. I don't see any chance for improvement under the present circumstance at all. Yes? What help is China giving North Vietnam, and what do they see as the future in Vietnam? Of course, they've been giving massive help to North Vietnam, economic, military help to Vietnam, short of sending their own people there. And well, for example, in Shanghai, there are, which is a big industrial city, I know for certain there were a great number of factories, the total production of which, 100%, went to Vietnam. The Chinese attitude has been, whatever you need, just say it, we'll give it to you if we've got it. And that includes any kind of weapons, any kind of, now it's mainly economic aid. Whatever they want, they can ask for. I think they see the eventuality in Vietnam is that of course, they recognize the provisional revolutionary government in South Vietnam, and they see that eventually, one way or another, no matter how long it takes, they're going to win. And at that point, then Vietnam will be unified. In the meantime, they have relations with both the revolutionary government and North Vietnam. That's their relationship there. Yes?
Is there any kind of religion there? And what is government's operating attitude?
Yeah, is there any kind of religion there, the gentleman's asking? What's the government attitude toward religion? Well, are you referring to Christianity or anything, huh? Yeah, well, Christianity, as far as China was concerned, was an importation. I mean, it was imported. It's not indigenous to China at all. Even Buddhism was imported to China, once again, not indigenous to China. As far as religion is concerned, in the Constitution, you have the right to believe anything you want to believe. That doesn't give you the right to proselytize, however. And they have the right not to believe. Everyone has the right not to believe in any religion. And they also have the right to preach atheism. That's written into the Constitution. So for example, there's still Christians in China. A friend of mine just came back from China, saw the former bishop, or I guess he's still the bishop of Nanking. His name is Ding, K.H. Ding, Ding Guang Xing, I think his name is. He was educated here in the United States and in Canada and England and so forth. He's the head of the seminary in Nanking, only there are no students in the seminary. And also one of the leaders of the Christian three self movement, that is, be self-help and self-sustaining and so on and so forth. His name is Wu Yaozong. He's an old man now, but I've known him for many, many years. He's a member of the People's Congress. He's a representative of the Christians in China, even though they're a very small minority. That's the situation. As far as minorities are concerned, national minorities, their religion is not touched. For example, Muslims, the Hui people, who are a national minority in China. If they want to believe in Muslim religion, that's their business. If they don't want to believe, that's also their business. And they're encouraged to settle this problem themselves. And for example, in my organization, there were a few Muslims, in Shanghai even. So we had to have a separate kitchen for them, because they have certain dietary laws. And so this was provided for them in Shanghai, far away from where they originally came from, northwest China, where I think there are a couple million of them. So this is the attitude of it. They don't think there's much hope in it. Yes, please.
Maybe you've already covered this, but could you talk about how the mass line worked in your office?
This draft, of course, the draft is based on first making some preliminary investigation. You go to each one of the subunits and find out what work they're doing, what they plan to do, and so forth. You also find out how this fits in with the overall plan, say, for the city of Shanghai, or whatever other bigger unit there is. And then on the basis of this, you make this preliminary draft. And then you send that down to all the study groups, which is the basic level, maybe 10 or 15 people each group, where they discuss the plan. And you collect all that information. It's all data collected, it's assembled, it's analyzed, sifted through what's correct, what's incorrect, and then you make another plan. Now you may do that several times before you finally say, okay, here's the plan we're going to carry out this time. That's just one example of how you do it. Another way, for example, the Cultural Revolution, in which you get one editorial in the People's Daily, in which everybody studies that editorial to catch all the little nuances and whatever characters are used and what is said and so forth. Everybody's asked to express an opinion. Everybody is asked to stand up and say what they think about it. This is the way they try to get as much input as possible on the grassroots level. Yes, please.
In mainland China, besides the Super Party, Communist Party, they still have several minority parties. And you used to work for Madame Song Qianlei.
Right?
She belongs to Kuomintang.
No, she does not. She doesn't. She's a non-party person. You're wrong.
But they still have several parties, right?
They do. They have what they call democratic parties. They also have what they call democratic personages, of which Madame Sun Qingling is one of them, just one of them. Like before he became a Communist Party member, Guomaro was also.
Those minority parties,
They don't have any power, no. But they exist.
What kind of those people feel
they're still consulted. They're part of the People's Congress. They're part of the People's Political Consultative Conference, which is a non-government organization, but which, once again, talk about mass line, which all kinds of plans, all kinds of discussion is handed for their opinions too. So they serve still serve some role. It's a small role, I admit, but still serve some role. You get various kinds of opinions. Not everybody can have one opinion about something. There are all kinds of ideas, all shades of ideas. Yes, one more, all right.
Maybe you have covered that before, but I'm anxious to know who find out the direction of the politics from, people or Chairman Mao?
It could be either way. It happens that Chairman Mao discovered there was an incorrect policy operating, not just an incorrect policy, but a group of people conspiring to put that policy into effect. That's why I had to start the Cultural Revolution. But you can find people even on the basic level discovering things, and if you discover something wrong, it's up to you whether you have the courage enough to stand up and say it. And there are all kinds of channels open to you. You can go to the head of your unit, or you can even start lower. You can go to the head of your study group, or you can go to the head of your unit. If you don't get satisfaction there, you can go to the head of the city party committee, for example, or the provincial party committee. Or if you're not satisfied there, you can go to Peking and ask to see someone in the central committee to take up your opinions. And people have done that. I've known people to do that. Yep.
I was wondering, is that a very slow process for 4 years before they find out what's wrong?
No, it was not such a slow process because I didn't go into the whole history of it. Before the Cultural Revolution, there was also socialist education movement, which was like a rehearsal for the Cultural Revolution. They discovered that. Before that, they discovered Liu Shaoqi's policies toward agricultural cooperatives was wrong. There were a whole list of, it's a whole history of things, not just discovered it overnight. All right, one more.
Could you tell, I'm just thinking about this question.
Yeah.
You told last year, you told a story about a strike on coffee.
I did?
Illustrated what people-
Oh, yes, I did, yeah.
Could you tell that story again? I think just,
I've forgotten. You'll have to remind me.
you said some people were angry at the wage points.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Stopped working.
Yeah,
And the party central committee came out, they started calling them.
right. That's right. I'm sorry. That was, yeah. Because I'm telling so many stories, I forget which one. Yeah, that's right. In one brigade, that was in one brigade, they found that the work point system was so complicated. It took so much accounting work that they needed a couple of people just to do the accounting work, which took them out of labor. And they were working all day and all night trying to get this complicated system to operate. And so they wanted to change it, make it simpler, and instead of having all this complicated thing, to have daily evaluation of their work or weekly evaluation of the work, to maybe try it once every 10 days or once every month or even once every few months. This was what they attempted to do, and the party secretary at that particular brigade refused to accept this. He said, this is the way it's got to be, this is the way it was handed to us, and you're not allowed to try anything else. But eventually the Central Committee heard about this and sent somebody down to, as they say, Diao-Cha Yenzhou, to investigate the situation in that brigade. And then they supported the people on the lower level asking to change this thing. Actually, it was in connection with the Dajai thing that this happened. Oh, thank you.